Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Field Quiver Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Jody Thibodeau, and it's my goal with this and every episode to help you fill your quiver with God and the great outdoors. If you listened to the reboot episode a couple weeks ago, then you know this episode is going to be a little bit different than previous episodes. It's going to be very similar, but there will be a few things that are a little bit different, starting out with the On My Radar segment. In the past, I've gone into detail about these different topics that I mentioned, but just for the sake of saving time, I'm going to just start giving you these different events and happenings. And in this case, for this episode, a couple of book titles that I've been reading that you may enjoy if you're interested in nature or different Christian-related topics. The first book is called Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. That's an interesting book that I listened to the audio format of. Now, I will tell you, it is from a secular scientific perspective, so there are allusions to evolution in it. And there are also quotes in it which include profanity, so depending on how old your children are, you may or may not want them reading it before you get a chance to read it and listen to it. But all in all, informative book. There's another book that I listened to the audio format of that actually plays into the Drop in the Bucket segment that I'll be getting to later on in the episode. And that is Mountain Man John Coulter, The Lewis and Clark Expedition, and the Call of the American West. That also is an interesting book if you're interested in the Old West and the exploration of the western portion of the United States. Outside of that, there is an event that I want to mention, two events actually. One is already happening. It's been going on for a touch over a month now, goes through the end of August, called the Plishing, or maybe it's Flishing, I don't know how to say it, but it's the South Carolina Wildlife Federation has put it on. This is the third year, but I'll have a link to that. And also, I mentioned a kayak angling tournament, bass tournament, that I was thinking about doing this summer when I interviewed the guys from Faith in Fishing. And I'm not going to get to do that. It just so happens this year it falls on the same day that we're having my daughter's birthday. But if you are interested in testing the waters of a kayak angling tournament, reach out to the office at the Kings Mountain State Park. That's part of the South Carolina State Park system. They have their annual kayak tournament coming up here in just a few weeks, actually, at the end of July. But that's it for On the Radar. I'll have links in the show notes for the different things that I've mentioned, so you can read up on it and find out more about it yourself. But let's just go ahead and hit the trail for this week's topic, which is, you've got just me this week, no guests, no interviews, but I'm going to be talking about something that we did at our church a few months ago that you may be interested in doing at your church in the future as an outreach event, or maybe just an internal event for the membership. But we're going to be talking about a casting contest. So this week, I'm going to focus on a casting contest that we had at our church a few months ago. We were just testing the waters with it a little bit to see how it goes, use it as kind of a dry run for a bigger, more involved outreach event next year, potentially. And as of now, it is looking like we will do it again, just a little bit differently, as I'll go into more detail about here in the next few minutes. But what brought this idea on was when I was in high school, our local association of churches had a outdoorsman event, a competition. On Friday night, we got together and had a meal, and there was a guest speaker. It's actually Sid Bream of Atlanta Braves fame, from the famous Sid Slides, if you remember that, if you're old enough to remember that. But he was actually into archery. and he came and he was the speaker. And if I'm remembering correctly, he actually participated in. And it seems like I heard that he actually won the archery tournament on Saturday that was held as part of this event. But the way it was set up was everybody came together on Friday for fellowship and to hear the gospel and to hear Sid's testimony. And then on Saturday, there were a variety of events you could participate in. There's skeet shooting, which I actually participated in that year, an archery tournament, a bass fishing tournament, and I believe a golf tournament was the fourth and final tournament they had. Well, I think it went on. I went on to college the next year, and I believe that next year was the last year they held this event. But it's something I've been thinking about the last few years about trying to incorporate at our church through our brotherhood ministry as an outreach event and as a way for the guys at our church to get together. But instead of doing all the different events on one day, spread it out over the year, maybe do one per quarter. And then at the end of the year, wrap it up with our sportsman's banquet, which we've got coming up at the end of August. If you're in the Lawrence area, I'll go ahead and do a sales pitch for this. We're going to have Defo coming to speak and a free meal. So it costs nothing. It's absolutely free. Come get a good meal, meet Ott, and who knows, we might even have some other famous local guys there if we can sweet talk them into coming. And we won't advertise who they are, so again, that's assuming we can sweet talk them into coming, but you never know who you'll meet. But outside of that in the future will be the culmination of the year, even though it's in August. We'll have events throughout the year that will build up points potentially, and this is all a big potentially, if you will. But if we have multiple events over the course of the year, we will crown the ultimate outdoorsman who is the best overall at all these different events. And some of the ideas that we've considered doing are the casting contest, which we have already had this year, and in the future adding a archery tournament, possibly a skeet shoot, and possibly a turkey shoot, and maybe even a kayak paddling skills tournament. So it's not just for sportsmen, but it's determining who is the ultimate outdoorsman. Who knows? We might even get some tents and have a contest to see who can put them together and fully set them up the fastest. I don't know. It's all just going to be for fun. But as of now, what we do have is a casting contest. And the reason we decided to do a casting contest is because not everybody bass fishes. Not everybody goes out for catfish. Not everybody goes out for brim. Not everybody goes out for crappie. Different people are interested in catching different things. Not everybody has a boat to participate in a tournament. Well, what is something that is in common with all anglers, no matter what their species of interest is, whether they have a kayak, whether they have a canoe, whether they have a $35,000, $40,000 bass boat, or if they fish off the bank? The ability to cast accurately. If you can't throw your lure where you want it to go, because that's where you feel that the fish are, then it's not going to go there, and there's a very good chance you're not going to catch anything. Well, I started researching it, looking into different casting contests that other folks have had, trying to get some ideas of what to include in this. I had some ideas, obviously 5-gallon buckets, maybe cornhole boards, just ideas from things that I had seen at the Bassmaster Classic Expo at the booths that the different vendors had set up, little games they had set up. Well, the only casting contest I could find was one that is actually held in Tennessee that Ott Defo helps put on at his church. And I think it was about a month, maybe 2 months before ours was held. But I ended up being able to pick his brain and get some suggestions from him that actually made us change a few things we were going to do the night before the event. But just starting out, if this is something that you're thinking about doing, obviously feel free to reach out to me. I can let you know more in depth about what did and didn't work out for us than what I'm going to go over on today's show. But I'm just going to highlight some of the bullet points and some considerations for you for if you are looking into doing your own in the future. First off, what is it in general that you're trying to achieve by doing a casting contest? Is this something that you want to do just for fun for maybe the boys of your church, the men of your church, all the members of your church, or do you want to make it an outreach event for the community where you can do like what we did? We had a meal beforehand. We had a speaker share his testimony and the gospel, and then we went into the contest. Are you looking to do it for bragging rights? Or are you going to actually have awards and prizes like we did? You don't have to go crazy with a budget for this either. The vast majority of things you can set up, you can probably find either already laying around your church, laying around your house, or laying around other folks' houses. But if you want to, then you can do what we did and go out and buy some of these things, some of which are actually specialty items specifically for events related to casting or for practice in casting. And you can spend anywhere from $5 or $10 on up. I mean, really, in reality, there's no limit on what you could spend. But we spent a minimal amount, but we have enough equipment now where we can set up 3 courses at the same time that are identical, and we can reuse this equipment year after year after year. So it's actually a one-time expense on that end. Now, there is one thing that I'm going to mention here in a few minutes that we will probably have to reorder every year because it's something that with the kids that participated, this is what we let them use to cast the plug and just let them keep that just as a little trinket of the event that they can take home and keep using. But again, once you've thought about who your main target audience is, just a few other considerations for you. Obviously, the budget, as I just mentioned. What is the purpose again? Is it going to be just for bragging rights, or are you going to actually give out awards? Is it an outreach event, internal event? Is it going to be a one-and-done event? That will also factor into your budget. If you plan on just doing this one time and never again, then obviously you're not going to want to drop a lot of money on it. But if it's something you think you might have annually or multiple times per year, then you might want to spend a little bit more money on it and go ahead and get equipment that is set aside specifically for these casting contests. Another major thing to consider is your venue. We're blessed at the church I attend where we have a gymnasium that we were able to hold it in, so it didn't matter what the weather conditions were. We could have the event no matter what. Outside of that, probably the single biggest consideration you have to make once you've thought about all those other things and you've decided that you are going to have a casting contest is the course design. And I'm going to pull this up. So I will say for those who are on a audio only format, consider checking out this video on YouTube because I am going to be putting up a couple of slides to show our course layout and some of the promotional materials that we made up to promote the event. I'll do my best to describe it because I know most folks only listen to the show and don't watch it on YouTube. But again, if you get a chance and an opportunity, just go ahead and check it out there on YouTube by searching for Field Quiver Outdoors. But first up, this is the course setup. We actually had 2 courses for us, and we had an accuracy course and a distance course. The accuracy was the main event, and on hindsight, we really need to go back and scale back the distance part, just because the folks that have the bait casters were the most accurate. and also some of the guys had spin cast. One of which was he wasn't planning on doing it, but we talked him into using his daughter's Moana reel, and he actually, I think he placed in the top 3. But as far as accuracy, those setups were a lot more accurate and easier to control than spinning reels. But the spinning reels completely dominated the distance for obvious reasons. Now, we did have one rule in place where you couldn't, whichever setup you used for the accuracy was the same one you had to use for distance. The only reason I put that rule into place is because I knew somebody would show up with a 15-foot surf rod set up and just really launch it and completely own it because of that. But what we'll probably do if we have the distant component in the future is we'll either scale the point system significantly compared to what we did this year, which this year it was starting at 30 foot of distance. Every 15 feet gains you an additional point. So at 30 foot, from a 30-foot mark to a 45-foot mark, anywhere that your plug landed, you got 1 point. From the 45 to 60 foot, you got 2 points, and then every 15 feet, you would get an additional point. But the catch was we had cones down the center to mark off these distances, and from those, we also had additional cones, 10 foot off either side of those cones to the center, so you had a 20-foot width course that your plug had to land in. If it went outside that 20-foot width, then it was a no score. You did get 2 attempts at the cast, but if you landed within 1 foot, so 6 inches of either side of the center, you would get additional points. As far as the distance goes, we had these plugs, and I don't know. Okay, so if I hold it, that works pretty well. This is a 1/2 inch just lead weight from Walmart. We bought literally every pack they had. They didn't have a lot of packs, but we bought every pack they had and spray painted them a fluorescent orange so they would be easy to see. Now, for the distance aspect, we did require that whatever you threw, the weight of it had to be a 1/2 ounce. That way it was equal across the board. Outside of that, when we were inside for the accuracy component, it didn't matter what size weight you used. The only stipulation was absolutely no hooks were allowed inside. And that's mainly because we had a lot of kids actually. Now, pulling back up the image, so this was the course we ended up finally deciding on. At first, it didn't look like this. Like, we got together and did some dry runs through it, and ended up, after we talked to Ott and amongst ourselves, this is what we came up with. Now, first off, if you're looking at this, you can see there is a platform. What that was just a place to get the competitor elevated slightly off the ground. What we did was we took 3 pallets, local feed store, donated some pallets for us that were in decent condition, went to the hardware store and purchased one sheet of particle board, just the cheapest. I think it was the 1/2 inch particle or OSB board. I don't even remember now I know it wasn't actual plywood. I think it was OSB. Anyway, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's going to be stood on. Just something solid to support the competitor. And what we did was, with the pallets, they were actually, the ones we got happened to be 4 foot wide, I believe. Let's see. I'm trying to remember exactly the size they were. But the way it worked out was, if you measure your pallet, most pallets are a standard size anyway. We cut the front portion of each pallet off. It was just a few inches, just took a Sawzall, cut it off, and that allowed us to be able to use one sheet of 4 foot by 8 foot plywood, cut it up into thirds, and it fit perfectly on that pallet. Screwed it down to the pallet so that it wouldn't shift around. And then on the bottom side of the pallet, I've seen, it looked like an Art Defoe, what they did with his tournament was they just stacked up 2 pallets, but I happen to have some old short pieces of 4x4s that were about 1.5 foot to 2 foot each, and we just took 4 of those and screwed those to the bottom side of the pallet so that it was stable but elevated that few more inches. That's where the competitor stood. Now, we had these targets numbered, and they were in a sequence. It was a logical sequence, so it would make sense to everybody. But there was also a judge, a scorekeeper, standing there to make sure people knew, especially the kids, that they were casting at the correct targets, because they had to go in order. At first, we were going to have the more difficult targets worth more points. But after talking with Ott, we decided that it would be in the best interest of our scorekeepers, which were a couple of our wives, that we wanted to keep the frustration down as much as possible for them and also for our sakes later, that we just decided you go in sequence, you get 1 point per target, 10 targets total, you go from 1 through 10, and then you start over. Each target that you successfully hit counts as 1 point. And you can go through it. There's a 2-minute time limit that we decided on. You can go, if you're able to, you go through all the targets as many times as possible, repeating them. What we did was we had some of these targets, and again, if you're listening, you won't be able to see these, but some of the targets that we had, and I'm going to show these on the YouTube video. So if you're listening, again, YouTube will maybe help clear up anything that I'm not able to describe very well. But these are pretty cool. We ended up buying some of these. These are called backyard bass. And we ordered, and I think it's called the Educator's Kit, where it had multiple of these targets, which have a place they lay flat, and there's a place you cast just over the head, and in the head there's a little slit that your line can go through, but they also make plugs that go with these, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But the thing with these half ounce weights that we had is they also will fit without coming out. So your weight, your plug, whatever you're using, would drag across into this channel. The line would be able to come through the channel, and you would reel in the fish. Now, for the kids, they didn't have to reel it in. Their plug or weight that they were throwing just had to touch it. The adults actually had to reel in this plastic fish and take it off and set it beside them. Now, obviously, if they made it all the way to 10, the fish wouldn't magically reappear in their position. They just had to, they would have skipped to target 3 if they were to start back over. But there were two of these backyard bass targets in the course, and the targets were offset from the platform. So it's probably about a 45-ish degree angle. And again, you'd cast over it, into it, reel it in, go to the next one, and those were the first 2. Same type of target. And if you're looking at this diagram, then it is actually, we tried to make it as easy as possible on the judges. So we actually had a fish there for that target. And I'll get to the scorecards here shortly, but basically what they would do is they would, as they did each one, they would put a check mark beside whichever target they were successful in hitting. And then at the end of 2 minutes, they could go through and count how many check marks they had. Easy peasy. All right, so up next, we had after the 2 fish targets, target number 3, and we had a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with numbers printed out as large as it would fit on an 8.5 by 11, taped on the floor in front of each target, so that there would be no question about what you were supposed to be hitting, except for the last one, which was like a large Rubbermaid bin at the very back up against the wall. And with that one, we just had the number taped to the target itself. Everything else was taped on the floor in front of the target. So the third target was a steel feeding pan, a steel feed pan that we picked up from Tractor Supply. Now, I do not remember what size this one is. They had two options. Oh, there it is right there. This is the 3 gallon. So it is a 14 inch diameter target. So that was set up. Now, I will say the first 2 targets, I do not remember how far away these targets were. I didn't think to write it down, but the fish targets were maybe 8 feet away from the stand. So adults using a casting rod, they could almost literally reach out and touch the first 2 targets. The next targets were maybe another foot or 2 beyond that, but I will put pictures up on the Instagram account, Field Quiver Outdoors, and also I'm working on putting together a packet for the website that you can download for free that is basically just a checklist and what I'm saying here to help you create your own casting contest in the future if you're interested. All right, so up next we had a small little Home Depot little 2 gallon bucket. There's one of these. That was the 4th target. Now with these, if you notice, again, if you're not watching, the handle was taken off. That was so that the plug would not land awkward and get stuck in the handle, and then there's an issue with them not being able to reel it back in quickly and get it untangled and go again. We just took the handles off just to prevent that from happening on most of them. Now, after it got to be a hassle taking the handles off of a couple of them that just wanted to be stubborn, we ended up just using painter's tape and taping around the handles so that there was no gap for the plug to go through to get hung in. After that, we had a 5 gallon bucket with a dust pan attachment. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of these dust pan attachments, but it literally just clips to the rim of a 5 gallon bucket, and then it lays down. The bucket would be at a very slight angle, but for the most part, it's laying on its side. Originally, with this, if you're looking at the video, you can see a line across the front of that. Originally, I was going to put a solid barrier in front of the 5 gallon bucket, in front of the opening to the bucket, so that you would actually have to slide your plug up the dust pan into the bucket. We ended up not doing that this year. Next year, if you come to our contest, expect to see that for at least one of the targets, though, to make it a little bit more challenging. But that was the 5th target. The 6th target and 7th target both were these. These are 8-quart, I believe, 8-quart buckets that we bought in 4-packs, or got them in 4-packs from Tractor Supply. They were gracious enough to help us out with some of the things that we needed to help us out with our budget. So if you've got a local feed store or any other local businesses, talk to them about it, and odds are that they'll help you out in whatever ways they can, especially if they themselves are believers, are Christians, and you're doing it as an outreach event. Then, if nothing else, I know most places, in small towns anyway, will gladly put up posters and flyers for you. So the 8-quart pail was target 6 and 7. Targets 8 and 9 were just a normal 5-gallon bucket that we had standing upright. And then again, the last bucket, as already mentioned, was just a large storage tote. One thing that I thought of that we didn't do, I don't know if we'll ever do it in the future, but something that might be fun if your budget would allow, is the little bobber coolers that float that look like bobbers. Maybe that's one of your targets. Maybe it's not at the very end. Maybe it's in the middle or near the beginning. Something that's easy that everybody could get it into, or something that's more challenging. But anybody who is able to successfully cast into that target, maybe have a drawing for those coolers. Again, I don't know. That it's just a thought. It's not something we did. Don't know that it's something we'll ever do in the future, but it just adds another fun element to it potentially, as being a fishing specific thing. I mean, if you don't fish, why would you want a bobber cooler, I guess? But you can do other things that you can incorporate into it that are fun. And that is the format of it. That is how we had our course laid out. Now, I will say this. For the kids, we let the kids do the exact same course. It didn't matter which age division you were in. We had 3 divisions. We had an adult division. We had a teen division, which was intended for basically 7th through 12th grade. And then we had a youth division, which was anybody younger than 7th grade. So basically, from the time you can cast through 6th grade, you were in the youth division. The difference for the youth division, for the kids, was they did not have to get the plug into the target. With the adults, if it was a bucket, or a pail, or the feed pan, it had to land in it. Now, it didn't have to stay in it. If it bounced out, we went ahead and gave them credit. Okay, so I've got a new guest here with me, Hazel. Hey, Hazel. Hey. So Hazel actually participated in the casting contest as a youth. So she's going to hang out with me while I finish recording this episode, I think, at least for a little bit. But what was your favorite part of the casting contest?
Everything.
Okay, so you didn't have a favorite part. What about the free stuff that you got at the end?
I liked it.
Okay. Well, you heard it. She had fun. So I know the other kids did too. But let's go ahead and get the show on the road and get this wrapped up, because we're looking at about 30-ish minutes at this point. I was not expecting to go this long, but you could have multiple courses for different ages. But again, I'll pop this back up for the YouTube guys. What we did was, if you were in the youth division like Hazel, she didn't have to cast her plug into the actual target. It just had to hit the target for it to count as a point. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and pop this up for the YouTube guys. This is what our scorecards looked like. Now, I'll go ahead and hold this one up. You won't be able to see it. It's too far away, I'm sure. And if I get it closer, it'll be blurry. But it's got the check marks for each one that they successfully hit. But with the kids, what we did end up doing was, if they did manage to land it inside of the target, they got an additional point outright. And that was really hard for them to do. There are only a couple of kids that actually managed to cast into the target. And the reason we did that, we didn't make them go into the target necessarily, is so they could progress further on potentially and try the different targets. But the way we had it set up was, it was literally, we printed out 4 to a page. And again, you don't have to use this design, but if this is a design that you choose to use for your event, this will be put out as a sample in the PDF that I'm working on. You're more than welcome to print it out and use it yourself and set up your course this same format if you like. If you want something changed around and you just don't have the technological know-how to do it, and the same with the logo that I'll show you here in a minute that I designed for ours. As long as it doesn't involve a whole lot of time-consuming work to change, and it's within my minimal technological know-how, then I will gladly make some changes to help you out. Just email me, jody@fieldquiveroutdoors.com, and I'll work with you as best I can to help you out, because this logo that we came up with was from scratch. So it is my logo now, and it wasn't stolen from anybody. The circular targets and everything I did from scratch on some graphic design software on the computer. But so if you're concerned about that, don't be. All I've got to do is change the wording around to match your event name. But outside of that, you would put the participant's name, and then at the bottom you would have the accuracy plus the distance equals their total score. And now in the future, next year, if we don't include the distance aspect, we'll just remove that, and it'll just have the accuracy, their score at the bottom. Now, as far as promotion goes, we had a couple of different things. We had one issue. We came up with a QR code. There's a little flyer that we had, little small, could print out 4 to a piece of paper on cardstock, and it had the logo that we came up with at the top, the date, time, and location, including address, as well as we noted on there that there would be awards in 3 different age divisions. Now this, if you're on YouTube, we had 2 different versions of this. One was a circular design with the QR code in the middle. Now this circular design was the actual logo that we came up with that our awards ended up being based off of. And then we had the rectangular one that I just held up and just described. The circular one for listeners, it's literally just a circular format. The wording is curved. It says 2024 Bellevue Baptist Brotherhood Casting Contest. With the bottom of it is a circular target with a plug with hooks on it. Looks like it is going towards the target to land on it with a line coming out from it. And that bottom curve of the outermost ring of the target finishes out the circle. Now, we had a full design that was longer that was included on the rectangular shape, and it is just the line extends on out to an angler actually casting, holding a pole, holding a rod, casting. We also had a flyer that could be given out or posted elsewhere. And the little catchphrase that I came up for it was, anyone can hook them, but can you hit them? And that's one of the things that we came up with and used that on the full-size poster. Now, one of the other things I do want to mention before I forget, because I already forgot to mention it, is equipment. Now, we did not provide any equipment except for tie breakers if it was needed, which was not in this case, unfortunately, because I was excited about seeing some folks use a cane pole and a Snoopy rod, even though we had one adult actually compete with a Moana reel anyway. But you provided your own rod and reel setup. That way is whatever you were comfortable with using. And you could use any weight, lure, jig, sinker, plug, practice plug, did not matter as long as it did not have a hook on it. Now, we had some cutters there in the event that somebody showed up with, say, a jig that still had the hook on it. We didn't cut it off for them, but we had those there for them to cut off. And that was like the one thing that we were going to be pretty strict about, was you cannot come in the building with anything with hooks attached to the line, for safety reasons, obviously, with people swinging them around, flipping them, and little kids running around. So that's one thing to definitely keep in consideration in the future. but we allowed any weight for the accuracy part. Again, for the distance, everybody had to use a 1/2 ounce, and we provided the 1/2 ounce for them. Now, for the kids, as I mentioned earlier, this is what we had for them. This is part of the backyard bass setup. It's just a little plug. It's actually cool. You can't see the detail, I'm sure, if you're watching on YouTube, but it's not just the shape of a fish. It actually has the features of a fish carved out into it. Now, later this week, I will be dropping on the YouTube channel a full-on review about backyard bass and their plugs. So stay tuned for that. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe so you'll know when that releases later in the week. The other thing with equipment is, I'm going to pull this flyer back up for the YouTube folks. We allowed any spinning, bait cast, or spin cast reels. So it didn't matter what length your ride was. We didn't put restrictions on that. The only thing was, obviously, no fly fishing equipment because we didn't have the room for it. And you could do a fly casting contest independently, but you could probably potentially do it inside. But this was focused on anglers who use the, I guess you could consider it the more traditional setups. I mean, me personally, I think fly fishing is more traditional in the truest sense of the term traditional. But this contest was specifically for spinning, bait cast, and spin cast. Now, again, you bring your own equipment, your own rod and reel. We had the 1/2 ounce plugs available if you didn't want to use your own, but the tie break would have involved a modified course using the backyard bass, where we had enough to set up, I think it was, we're going to have 2 competitors go at a time, if I'm remembering right. And because we didn't have to do it, I can't remember what exactly we decided on because I made the mistake of not writing it down. But we're going to have multiples of the backyard bass set up, and they had to actually get those with a cane pole. And then once they got those, they had to use the Snoopy rod and reel to finish out as many more targets as possible in a time limit. Now, we were going to time them with the cane pole, and then, if needed, if that tie break didn't settle matters, then we would go to the Snoopy rod and reel with the, just like the first course, but they had to use a Snoopy rod and reel, little kids rod and reel. Outside of that, we had awards. I'll go into that, and then that's pretty much going to wrap up the show. But the first consideration we had was a rectangular plaque. We ended up, because of wood, we had enough wood to make coasters. So we ended up doing first, second, and third place for each of the 3 divisions with these. And then for prizes, we had a local company donated a bunch of packs of crappie baits for the kids to each have their own pack who participated. But we also took a lot of stuff that I had accumulated from going to the Bassmaster Classic Expo for 2 years in a row, that we just took prizes from that stuff, brand new lures that had never been opened, and also $25 gift cards to Bass Pro for the first place in each division. So, you don't have to spend a lot of money to make it a successful event, but you can do one or two things. Just the last thought on this is you can either require specific casting techniques for certain targets, or just do it like with ours, and it's free game. Just get it in the target, and you're good to go. And appropriately, since we're talking about fishing and buckets, the drop in the bucket for this week, for an idea for you to consider for your outdoor bucket list if you're looking for ideas, comes from the book that I mentioned earlier, but it is to go and see Pompey's Tower, which it's known now as Pompey's Pillar, but it is one of the only locations from the Lewis and Clark expedition where you can actually see where members of that expedition actually left something behind in they carved out when they were at that site. And obviously, as you can see, my guest host left for a minute to go get a popsicle. But that's it for this episode. And until next time,
Bye.
we'll be back in 2 weeks with the next episode.